All right, guys, so a little bit more with domain and range. Because again, I think folks struggle with this and it's not as hard as they make it out to be. So first thing with domain and range, remember domain, right? I just shorten it to D because I'm kind of lazy. Domain is your input, okay? Domain is going to be your horizontal axis, okay? Whether it's X or it's T or it's some other thing, and range is always going to be your output. That's what you get out of an equation, and that's going to be your vertical axis. So there's two domain rules that you can't break, not in math, not in physics, not in engineering. They all mean different things depending on the class you're taking, but you can't break them, okay? One is you can't divide by zero, okay? You can't divide by zero, okay? And that's specifically, both of these are applying to your input. In math, that's going to be X. In a science class or an engineering class, that's going to be your horizontal axis. Whatever variable goes on your horizontal axis, whatever you input in to get your output. You can't divide by zero. And the other one is you can't take an even root of a negative number. And there's a few exceptions to that, like in electrical engineering, you get some imaginary values. But for the most part, we follow these two rules always, okay? So what is domain and what is range given a picture? Okay, so what is our input, what is our output? So remember, domain, you can't divide by zero, can't take the even root of a negative number, and then domain is going to be your input. What can you put into that equation? Well, if you have the picture, it's really, really easy. Remember, domain input is your horizontal axis. So I take this first picture, right? And I look and I say, what is the domain? Okay, what is the domain of this first picture? Well, it starts at -3 and it goes to the right. So the domain is going to be -3 to infinity. It's that easy. What does that mean? I can plug any number greater than -3 into this equation and I will get an output. And by the vertical line test, what do we realize? For every input, pick an X value, go up, it hits in one place, we get one Y value. Go up, it hits in one place, we get one Y value. So this is a function. So this is a function. The domain is -3 to infinity. And let's look at the range. Well, this thing goes off to the right, but it also goes up. So it starts at 2 and goes up. So it's going to be what? 2 to infinity. Okay? Let's take this one. Is it a function? Again, vertical line test. One place, one place, one place, one place, one place. Everywhere I draw a vertical line, it hits one spot. So yes, it is a function. Is a function. Okay, and that's important. And then our domain and our range. Let's find our domain and range. Okay, well, our domain, this thing keeps going off to the left and up, and this thing here keeps going off to the right and up. So it keeps going left, it keeps going right. What's the domain? -infinity to infinity. What's the range? Well, this keeps going up, this keeps going up, so it's going to go to positive infinity, but the lowest point is -4, so the range will be -4 to infinity. Okay, and just a reminder, the square bracket means it can be equal to that number. The round parentheses means it cannot be equal to that number. Okay, and so in the example of infinity, we can never reach infinity, so we always put a parentheses for infinity. Okay, but it actually comes down and touches this point 5, -4, so we know -4 is included. Okay, we got that little dot. Same here, we got that little dot that tells me those points are included. Okay, so here we've got a circle. Here we've got a circle, and vertically it goes from 0 to 8, and horizontally it goes from 0 to 8. So what is the domain? Well, the domain is 0 to 8, and I just ran out of ink on my pen. Yay! That's the wonder of these old pens. You can't tell how much ink's in them. Okay, so we'll switch pens. Okay, 0 to 8, and the range is also 0, not infinity, brain. My brain wants to put an infinity there. Okay, doesn't go to infinity, it only goes to 8. Okay, so 0 to 8 for the range, 0 to 8 for the domain. Is it a function? Well, if you draw a vertical line, what do you see? 1, 2. So this is not a function. Not a function. Okay? So let's keep going. Let's do these three here, right? Same thing. The domain and the range. Okay? Well, the domain, if we look at this, this keeps going off, up and to the right, and this keeps going down and to the right. Okay? So it's going to keep going off to the right, so we know it's going to end at positive infinity, right? Positive infinity. But the furthest left point, the leftmost point, will be -5. So we put -5 to infinity. How about the range? Well, it goes up and to the right, it goes down and to the right. Well, it's going to keep going up forever, it's going to keep going down forever. So the range will be -infinity to infinity. Okay? Is it a function? We're going to say no, it is not a function. Okay? Not a function. Why? Because vertical line hits in two places. So for one input, which is the x value, we have what? Two outputs. That violates the definition of a function. Okay? This guy here, you draw these vertical lines in here, anywhere you want to draw them, anywhere you want to draw them. We always hit one spot, one spot, one spot, one spot. So yes, it is a function. It is a function. And the domain, what's the domain? What's the range, right? Well, the domain, this thing keeps going to the left, this thing keeps going to the right. So the domain is all real numbers, -infinity to infinity. Okay? What's the range? Well, this keeps going up, and this keeps going up, so we know the range ends at infinity. And then we say, okay, well, this is -2 in the y direction, and this is -4 in the y direction. So we're going to take the lower point, -4. Okay, so it's going to be -4 to infinity. So it goes from -4 and up. Okay, because -2 is included in that interval. All right, but it is a function. And then this one here, the last one, right? If you draw your vertical lines, what do you see? 1, 1, 1, 1. All of these are going to hit the y-axis in one place, right? One place. So yes, it is a function, okay? And then what's the domain and what's the range, right? Well, the domain, this keeps going left, and this keeps going up and to the right. So the domain is going to be all real numbers, -infinity to infinity. All right, what's the range? Well, it almost touches the x-axis, which is 0 in the y direction, and it keeps going up. Okay, so it's going to be 0 to infinity. And we're going to put a parenthesis here, not a bracket. Why? Because it does not touch 0. It almost touches 0. Okay, so this is an asymptotic function. There's a line here that prevents this from touching 0, kind of like cones on a highway. Okay, cool. So let's talk about without a picture. Okay, so let's talk about without a picture. Okay, without a picture. And these are a little harder, but I think we can make them make sense. Okay, so without a picture, no picture to go on, nothing to work with. What's our domain? What's our range? Okay, well, ask yourself, go back to our two rules. Is this dividing by 0? No. How do I know that? Well, it's not dividing. It says 3 times x plus 5. It's not dividing. So it can't be dividing by 0. Is it taking the even root of a negative number? Again, no, because there's no square root in the problem. So the domain for this problem will be all real numbers. Okay? And then from that, you can usually come up with the range. I tell my students a lot of times the range is going to match the domain. So if the domain is all real numbers, the range will be all real numbers. There are some exceptions, okay? But this is a straight line. And if you know that, y equals 3x plus 5 is a straight line, what's a straight line look like? Like that, right? So it's going to keep going off to the right and up and to the left and down. That would make the range all real numbers as well, right? So negative infinity to infinity. Cool. How about this guy? Okay, domain and range. Well, without a picture, it's really hard. And back to this, is this a function? Yes, it is a function. Okay, yes, it is a function. So is it a function? Yes or no? Okay, that's what we're looking for. Okay, is this a function? Yes. What's the domain and range? Well, x squared minus 7x plus 8 is going to make a parabola. And you're going to have to find that point. And I've got that in another video. Okay? But if you find that point, guess what? And we're going to call that point C. Okay? Actually, we're going to call that point C comma D. Okay? C comma D. What would the domain be? The domain would be the x coordinate, right? We don't need that x coordinate because it keeps going left, it keeps going right. The domain would be all real numbers. Okay? The range would be what? D to infinity. So that y value up. So you have to be able to find that vertex. Now, how do I know the domain is all real numbers other than knowing what the picture looks like? We'll go back to our two rules. What are our two rules? You can't divide by 0. You can't take an even root of a negative number. Okay? Again, look at your question. Am I dividing x by anything? Am I dividing anything by x? The answer is no. Am I taking an even root? No. You cannot violate those two rules. The domain has to be all real numbers. Okay? How about here? Am I dividing by 0? No. Am I taking an even root of a negative number? Yes. Yes, I am. Okay? So this is rule 2. Rule 2. Okay? You are, in fact, able to take the square root of a negative number because there's a square root in the problem. So I take this guy and I say square root of x minus 1, right? And I set it equal to 0. Now, square both sides. You get x minus 1 equals 0. X minus 1 equals 0. Move that over, you get x equals 1. Okay? That's called your critical point. Okay? That's an important point where something breaks in math usually. Or something important happens. It's not always breaking math, but usually it is. Okay? So what do we know? If I plug in a 1, what's 1 minus 1? It's 0. Well, anything less than that is going to give me a negative number under here. So here's what we say. Our domain must be 1 to infinity. Okay? Our domain must be 1 to infinity. And again, to find range, a lot of times you do have to have a picture. You have to find some magic point. Same thing here. This plus 3 tells us this has been shifted up, and that's all a whole different discussion on transformations, tessellations, and reflections. But for domain specifically, you can find it without the picture. Domain is going to be from 1 to infinity. Why? Because any number bigger than 1 will give me a positive number under here. And that's what we have to have. Okay, how about here? Are we breaking a rule? Well, I'm not dividing by x, and I'm not taking an even root. Taking an odd root, that doesn't count. I'm not taking an even root. So what's the domain? The domain is going to be all real numbers. Okay? How about here? I am taking an even root. I am taking an even root. So I have to set this equal to 0. Raise it to the 8th power, so I get x minus 3 equals 0. X equals 3. What does that tell me? Every number bigger than 3 will make this positive. Every number less than 3 will make this negative, which breaks my rule. So I have to stay 3 and above. So what's my domain? My domain is 3 to infinity. Okay, 3 to infinity. Okay, how about here? And by the way, all of these are functions. If you're interested, this is a function, this is a function, this is a function. Okay, and again, it's because for every number I put in, I'm getting one number out. Okay, cool. How about this guy? This is a little different, isn't it? This is very, very different. What do you see? Y squared. As soon as I see that, here's what I know. It's not a function. I know immediately it's not a function. Why? Because if I plug in a value for x and I solve this for y, I'm going to get two answers. Because I'm going to take the square root and get a plus or a minus. Okay? So immediately I know this is not a function. Okay? Because it's not a function, finding the domain and range is I will say, fairly difficult. Okay? Finding the domain and range of this is fairly difficult. Okay? So I kind of let that one go. But it is not a function. Okay? Let me get to these last couple. All right. Y equals 5 over x plus 1. This breaks rule 1. Why? Because I'm dividing by x. Use your imagination. If I put a negative 1 here, what's negative 1 plus 1? It's 0. Okay? If I plug in x equals negative 1, I'm dividing by 0. So what do I know? X cannot be negative 1. Doesn't break any other rules. So guess what? The domain is going to be negative infinity to negative 1 union negative 1 to infinity. So x equals negative 1 is breaking my rule of division by 0. So what this says is x can be every number except negative 1. That union means we skip equaling negative 1. Okay? So that parenthesis says we can go right up to negative 1, right? Negative 1.1, negative 1.05, negative 1.001. But we cannot equal negative 1 itself. That's what that says. It can be every other number except negative 1. Okay? So that is your domain. Okay? That is your domain. And again, for each number we put in for x, we're going to get one answer for y. So one input for x is going to be one input for y. Yes, this is a function. Okay? How about here? This is two inputs for x will lead to one output for y. Again, one input equals one output. Two inputs equals one output. Perfectly okay. Still meets the definition. So yes, this is a function. Okay, yes, this is a function. How do we find the domain? Well, are we breaking a rule? Yes, we're breaking rule 1. We can, in fact, divide by 0. So what we do is we set that bottom equal to 0. Well, how do we solve a polynomial set equal to 0? Well, we factor it. So if I factor x squared plus 9x plus 8, I get x plus 1, x plus 8 equals 0. And this gives me what? X is equal to negative 1 and negative 8. Those two values make my denominator equal to 0. Okay? Those two values make my denominator equal to 0. That means I cannot have them in my domain. So, what is my domain? It's negative infinity to negative 8 union negative 8 to negative 1 union negative 1 to infinity. And that's just a really fancy mathy way of saying every number from negative infinity to infinity, but skip negative 8 and skip negative 1. Okay, that's what that says. All right, last one. This is an ellipse. Okay, this is an ellipse. And if you know that, you immediately know it's not a function. It's not a function. Why? Because an ellipse is an elongated circle, and if you draw a vertical line, well, what's my secret? Y squared. For an input, I'm going to get two outputs. Okay, so that is not a function. Okay, and if you know something about ellipses, you could plot this and find the domain and range. Okay, again, a lot of times these questions will say if it is a function, find the domain and range. Okay, so if it's not a function, you don't have to do that. Okay, if you had to find the domain and range of this, you would need to be able to plot this and find it from the picture, like way up here when I did this circle, right? Left side, right side, that's your domain. Top and bottom, that's your range. Okay, same with this guy here. Okay, it's not a function. If you needed to find the domain and range, you'd want to plot this, okay? And that's going to be a sideways parabola. So kind of not part of this video, but just can you find the domain without a picture? Is it a function without a picture? And remember, it all boils down to these two rules. Are you dividing by x? If you are, then you could divide by 0. Find those values. They cannot be in your domain. Are you taking the square root of a negative number? If it doesn't have a root sign, if it doesn't have a radical, that's always a no. And so it'd be all real numbers. If you are in fact taking the radical, right, the square root, so right here you're taking the square root of x minus 1, you got to find out, okay, where's that equal to 0? At 1. Well, anything lower than 1 is going to make it negative. You can't do that. So your domain has to be that number and above, okay? I hope that helps someone. Domain and range can be very confusing for a lot of students, but once you figure it out, it's not really that hard, and it's really, really important later on, especially if you go into a field like engineering, because you need to understand what can I put into this equation. That's your domain. And especially computer programming, things like that, you want to set it up so that if they put something that's not in the domain, it gives an error, okay? So anyway, if you have questions, leave them in the comments. I hope that helps. And if you have other video ideas, send them to me. Thanks, guys.